In my last blog, we looked at how the Lord carried his people throughout their journey around and across the wilderness. We saw in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 31, it said, "You saw how the Lord your God carried you, as a father carries his son, all the way you went until you reached this place." We also saw how this wasn't as straightforward or enjoyable as it could have been. Today, we shall dip into some of God's purposes for his people during this difficult and testing period and see that, unsurprisingly, he is still the same good father, and that we today still need to learn pretty much the same lessons as did the people of Israel. So let's read Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 2 to 5. "Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years, to humble and test you, in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Your clothes did not wear out and your feet did not swell during these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you." Well, whether it is described as carrying or leading, God certainly wanted to take them somewhere. But with God, it's as much about the journey as it is the destination. Yes, he wants to get us to a good place, but in his values and perspective, we ourselves are a vital part of the true goal. Our response, our heart, our character, and our maturity. So what does this passage tell us about this necessary but often uncomfortable process of refinement? Well, firstly, we see that God was testing his people to know what was in their heart. Not that he was ignorant, but rather they were. Would they be obedient or disobedient under pressure? The testing would bring to light what was hidden. I remember once seeing a vivid illustration of this. The preacher put a large bucket out with water in it, and he squeezed a sponge that had been in that bucket, and when he squeezed it, the water which came out of the sponge was dirty and black. "Where did the water come from?" he asked. Well, the obvious answer was that it came from the sponge that was being squeezed, but the deep answer was that it was already there within the sponge. Squeezing or testing brings out what is in our hearts, for better or for worse. Secondly, the Lord wanted to use this situation of testing to humble them. He knew how much they needed him, but he wanted them to learn it too. They were understandably concerned about their daily bread in an unforgiving wilderness environment. But he wanted them to know that life is so much more than the basic necessities of life, as Jesus, of course, picked up on in the Gospels, pointing the people back to this Old Testament revelation of God being a good and caring Father. So this makes sense of the statement we just read, where it says, causing you to hunger and then feeding you with manna. God was not capriciously or even spitefully allowing them to be in need before providing for them. It all came from a fatherly heart and with fatherly purpose. He was teaching them vital lessons of life based around their relationship with him. So the lesson of his provision of daily bread is illustrative of his greater provision of care, protection, wisdom, and strength. And likewise, the faith that he wants to build in us may start with provision of our basic necessities, but it is designed to grow and broaden so that we can trust him, not just for our needs, but for all the adventures of our journey too. Finally, this passage moves from what's in your heart to know in your heart. Not classroom knowledge alone, but the knowledge of relationship and experience. God wants us to know who he really is. That he is a Father who is both present and active, whatever the circumstances. And that his discipline in our lives is not to condemn us, but to bring us true life. A discipline that reveals and refines us from hidden sinful attitudes and habits, and a discipline which brings us to the full knowledge, wisdom and maturity of grown-up sons and daughters. So what's in your heart? In your testing and difficult circumstances, let him teach you a response of faith and obedience, so that you too know in your heart who he truly is and who you are in light of that. Amen.